Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey, welcome to Big Blend Radio, everybody, with Nancy and Lisa, the crazy mother-daughter travel team and publishers of Big Blend Radio and TV magazine, as well as Parks and Travel magazine. You can see them both at BigBlendMagazines.com. Today we have award-winning author Marc Graham joining us to talk about two new releases. He's been busy. He's got a historical fiction novel out. It's called Son of the Sea, Daughter of the Sun. Like, even the title makes you want to read it,
I
right?
like that.
It's like, yeah, you get all like, cool. And then this other one is really cool, especially for writers. Runes for Writers, Boost Your Creativity and Destroy Writer's Block. Nancy and I talk about writer's block on the show all the time.
Yeah.
And some people say it doesn't exist. I go, yes, it does. I know it does. So check it out. Now, we've got Marc joining us to talk about both books, and I encourage you to go, of course, get them on Amazon. They're both out right now. You can go to Amazon, all those places. But I always say go and connect with the authors directly on their website. His website is marc-graham.com, and that's Marc with a C, because that's what he likes. Hey, Marc, how you doing, Marc with a C?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's good to have a Marc with a C. We rarely get to see that, actually. Do you run into a lot of Marcs with C's? You know?
Not a lot.
Well, you must be the son of the sea. Here it is. So this is interesting. You're based in Colorado. Nancy and I travel full-time on our Love Your Parks tour, and we went to Greeley, Colorado, just north of you, because I know you're in Denver area, right? And
right.
Spent some time there, and then went to a friend's place, and she has a little writer's retreat in Florence area.
So nice.
Kind of near Pueblo.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, man, we ended up on a detour. It must be because she's a writer. I don't know what it is, but we ended up doing all these parks. Like, it is a beautiful area. Do you get inspired by nature and landscapes in your writing, whether it's historical or just the creative process?
I do. I mean, there's a power in nature that we really lose. Our lives are spent so much indoors now. And inside of insulated material, inside of wood, inside of steel. And I think there's really a power that we miss from losing that connection to nature. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely power in our natural environment, especially, our mountains out here, our old forests. There's a lot of stuff out there that can really help. In my world, it really helps with the creative process for sure.
And also,
there's like an instant calm down.
Yes.
Yeah, when we visit lots of parks, and it's like from how busy everything is, and then you go into a park, and it's just like a deep breath and an instant calm down, and then you feel like, okay, everything's fine. When you're somewhere else, it doesn't sound like everything's fine. Especially if you watch the news. But then when you go into a park, you're like, hey, it's all good.
Yeah. Well, we're inundated, as you said, by news, by devices, all this electromagnetic energy that's always surrounding us and pouring into us all the time. And when we can get into nature, I mean, we're just grounded, and all that built up energy, just the earth just takes it all in and has the power to heal that.
I want to ask this because it's interesting when we think about, going to nature. As soon as we get in nature, I'm writing stuff in my head, whether it's an article about the place that we're in, whether you just start getting creative. Your mind opens up to the creative force. And then it's like, oh crap, I got to write this down. No, I don't want to, because it'll ruin the process. You know what I mean? It's like, we go out, we do a lot of photography, and then it's like, oh, you need to step away from the camera so that you can actually see, right? So the same thing happens. And then you end up in your hotel room, as we do, and then it's like, oh, now you have to do all these articles, and you're like, oh my God, how do I get in from there to A to B between the two? And I'm thinking about that with authors that are writing, no matter what you're writing, whether you're a writer, doing articles for publications, or you're writing a novel or a nonfiction book. There's this thing where you are suddenly, you're looking at your screen, not just a typewriter. Some people still do that, but there's this, I think the writer's block part of that is going from, we call it the in and the out. When you're out, then we can't come back in. And then once we're in, it takes us a while to I don't
go out.
know. We need to bring the out in the in. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It does. And that's, you know, it's really the connectivity and the nature of creativity. And I go into this in Runes for Writers a bit with the nature of creativity and that receptive source. You know, when as you're getting these ideas, as you're, you know, connecting with the muse, you know, the guides, whatever you want, however you want to describe that, that's a, you know, essentially a lower level of consciousness. You know, that's your the unconscious and the subconscious levels really working together. But to put that onto paper, to bring that into language, requires our ordinary consciousness. So there is a split, a dichotomy between them, and it's really, you know, the more you practice that that kind of go between the intellect and the base creativity, the more you create those pathways, the easier that process becomes.
That's really interesting. We just we're here in Yuma, Arizona, and we had a bunch of travel writers that we invited here for a festival, and we're kind of working with them, and we were talking about that because you're out as a travel writer. You're really out there doing stuff, and I'm like, well, does anybody else battle with this? Because I was thinking, I knew you were coming on the show and everything, and they're like, dude, it's the hardest part because, and it's true, once you're out, you don't want to go in. And how do you, you know, and then, you know, a lot of people are doing things where they're on social media the whole time. So I don't think you always get that true connectivity. I find what you're doing with the runes very interesting. We had a friend in out in the desert in San Diego area, and Brago Desert.
The rune master.
Terry the Rune Master, and our band used to play out in the desert, this horse camp, right? And at the end of the evening, and you can imagine this, right? He would bring out the runes, and everybody's like, "Dude, man!" But anyway, there was
made them himself.
But it was really interesting because of the markings on them. But at the same time, it was kind of like he was almost like the psychic at the end of the evening, or it's like tarot cards in a way, right? Can you give everybody an idea of what we're talking about when it comes to runes? Because they're ancient. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the runes at their simplest form, they were the alphabet, basically the writing system used by the ancient Norse and ancient Germanic peoples. But before they came into use as a writing system, they were a tool of divination. They were used by the Norse wizards, the shamans of the Northern Europeans, and you probably need to define shaman. You know, it's not, people think of, you know, medicine men or, you know, witch doctors, things like that. And all these are true. But the shamans were, in ancient societies, shamans were the healers. They were the storytellers. They were the myth keepers. The psychologists, the therapists of the time as well. So all the things that had to do with things we cannot see or experience with our five primary senses, the shaman goes into those worlds. And story, that we can probably get into a bit more, story and myth are part of that, and dreams even. And so runes were one of the tools, the specific set of tools that Northern European shamans developed to help them make that connection to the other world, into the, you know, that realm of creativity, of myth, of the other, basically.
It's a connection, because I saw also, we have your book, but I see that there's other things going on too, like a game. Like I was on your Facebook page, and I'm like, dude, there's a game with dice and all this. Like, dude, I want to play. It kind of looks like a Ouija board, but not. Like it's a whole, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, because there's an action to it. Even when you like throw the runes or you look at a rune, you're already setting up your consciousness to change, right? Because now you're doing an action.
Yes. Yeah. And really what it is, you know, people can get as, you know, as mystical about it or as pragmatic as they want, as their world allows. You know, whether you want to talk mysticism, quantum physics, neuropsychology, they're all pointing to in the same direction. And where it's what the runes do, at least the way that I'm using them, particularly toward the writing process, but they can be used, you know, again, they're originally developed for divination, you for psychotherapy, for looking into your own life and the energies surrounding you and helping you to make sense of them and to navigate them. And so I've simply adapted those ancient primordial processes specifically toward storytelling, toward creativity. But yeah, just the act of opening yourself up to the possibility that maybe there's something there, you begin to access the power of the runes and the power of creativity.
Isn't it just really sort of making yourself look at things in a totally different way than you normally would? Because we have routines, and everybody thinks routines are healthy, and they probably are to a certain point. But then they go too far where that's all you're doing. It's the same thing every day.
Yes.
And maybe just, like that's why I like Halloween. It's like, get it over it, people. You're going to be somebody else for a night. That's my favorite holiday, because it's like, hey, wait a minute. There's other things out there. So it's kind of a reminder to look around in a, to me, it's like, if I was a bird, I wonder what it looks like when you're up as a bird flying and looking down, and you're going to land on this tree over here, as opposed to I'm sitting under the tree and watching the birds land.
Yeah, it does. And you make a really good point with that notion of the commonplace, right? And that we may start something new and then becomes a habit and becomes run of the mill, becomes commonplace. That's a brilliant connection I've never made before, that the notion of the holidays, of watching the seasons, all these things of just being mindful of how you walk through life. That's not necessarily germane to what we're talking about, but that's a really powerful point that you've just made.
I think that it's true, because we become complacent as human beings, and the runes and going back in mythology, like there's an excitement. Look at and look what you're writing in historical fiction, right? It takes us back to the lords, the kings, and that whole, oh wow, I look at as soon as I started reading everything you're doing, I'm like, I would go back to childhood mode, and I remember Sinbad the sailor, and then he flew on the magic carpet and went into those big ice caves, right, with all these big ice crystals, and I'm like, that has stayed with me forever. And it was like,
Right.
I want to go there. This is this magic land, this paradise. It's like, it's like being a pirate, but a nice one, privateer, excuse me. But yeah, go, so there's this whole magical, mystical thing that when you unlock that, that's when you get it. It's like, psychedelic music. I'm into that because it's taking you on a trip, on a journey. But if you're not allowing yourself to go there, you have to have something that jolts you. And that's what I think the runes, what you're doing with the runes and showcasing that is, it's actually a jolt to the writer. It's a jolt to a human being in general too. I would say read this. No matter what you're doing, it's going to help you in business. It's going to help you in creativity. It's going to help you in so many different forms. So I think that's where Nancy's going. It's like giving you that other observation, but also you talk about ritual and the importance of ritual. So you need to have that routine and that ritual, but you need to keep it special in some way, so you don't take it for granted.
And the whole point is that really the power in ritual is not necessarily that the candle is magic, or that the incense is magic, or the music, or whatever you have. The fact of the matter is, everything is magical when you get down to it. But it's really making a conscious decision, to separate yourself from the intellect for the moment. To enter willingly into the mystical realms, into the dream state, into that place of creativity, and to tell the other levels of consciousness. We have within us at least 9 levels of consciousness that we're constantly moving through. We're not always aware of it in our intellect, but our body is consciousness, and story connects with certain levels of consciousness. And when you separate yourself, take the time to separate, put the intellect aside, enter into those more creative realms, the muse is there. The muse recognizes you're serious about it, and is gonna willingly play with you and work with you in those times.
when
It
you
just
delve
kind of
into
reminds me of like I have this thing about I want to communicate with animals, both pets and wild. And I've spent time just like I've learned that there are some animals you shouldn't stare at because they get really angry.
Yes, yes.
And they make it's a confrontation to them. And people don't like to be stared at either, but it's like communicating with an animal, trying to figure out what they're thinking and why. And it's interesting because some animals will come and sit next to you and other ones will just like, I'm out of here. So it's kind of like not being who you are or normally are and being somebody else for a little bit. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, and it does. With the with all those various levels of consciousness, some of those we share in common with the animals. Some of those we share in common with trees and rocks, and I mean, everything in the universe is consciousness. Energy is consciousness. So we have that in common. There are some levels of consciousness that we may share with beings of higher evolution, that we aren't aware of with our intellect or lower levels of consciousness. So, it's really, and this whole science of consciousness is brand new in scientific terms. It's ancient in terms of shamans and mysticism, but it's, science is beginning to catch up finally. It's really exciting time.
Yeah, the cloth and the science, they're merging. It's so exciting to see, because I look at this on like a scale of where you talk about myths and legends and the mystics, and there's also these stories, like the stories, the storytelling, like you said, it's the key point of all of it. And having lived in different countries and being raised in different settings, right? There's always these, like in South Africa, there was always these stories that the Bushmen would tell, and it would talk about how the spear would go up and up into the stars, and then the stars would come down, and then there's this connection of how things were planted because of that. And then you'll go to another country and another culture, and it will be a different cast of characters, but they're saying the same message. When I look at what Hinduism, and I got into that, I was really, because it was just interesting about the gods. And then you still look at them from like the Norse gods. Isn't it kind of the similar? Like when you go to war, you need to call upon this god, and it could be in, if it's Catholicism, they're going to call on this saint. You know what I mean? There's kind of a universal thing, but the cast of characters change out, but it's still kind of the same story, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's interesting. Part of the school of teaching that I've been working with, there's a definite connection. I mean, the Norse and the Vedics are all from the Indo-European root people that came out of Africa ultimately. And there are distinct similarities between Thunar, or Thor, the thunder god, and in the Vedic culture as well. Even in the Chinese, thunder god is red-haired, as is Thor. So there are definitely these underground currents that whether maybe they evolved separately from the just the commonwealth of humanity, or they carried them with them out of Africa as we began to populate the earth. But yeah, there are definite connections. This stuff is not just made up or accidental. There's a fundamental force of nature underlying all of it.
It's fascinating to me, and it's about delving into it, right? And so you talk about dreams, and like meditation to me is a huge part of unblocking and going somewhere. And I think there's this part of writers that do this too, and you're kind of co-creating your dream or your meditation, because I think they hold hands in a lot of ways. And there's a co-creation process, and then you're like, dude, wake up and write it down.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's actually the notion of using the runes as a writing tool came during a meditation. I spent about 6 months, 24 weeks meditating on one of the runes each week, or for the entire week. And it was about the middle of that process when really the idea and the the system. You mentioned the dice and the
Mm-hmm.
mandala tray. All these came almost fully formed out of a meditation. Just one of those things of trying to keep up with it, as the idea was just spilling forth.
Wow. So it is about getting rid of the monkey mind.
It really is. Yeah. And you mentioned writer's block earlier, and whether it's just sit down and do the work, as some people say, there's no such thing as plumber's block is the popular analogy. But
That's funny.
anytime you're stuck, anytime you don't know where the story or the article or the essay is going, you're blocked. It's call it what you want. There's something there. And one of the things that we need to understand about the creative process, at least I have had this, I've struggled with this, the idea that that the story comes from my intellect, and the ego and the intellect really want us to believe that, so that we can feel special and feel privileged about ourselves somehow. Truth of the matter is, it's not the intellect that's creating the story. The intellect is putting it in order, turning it into language. But if you let the intellect take the story, it will take it straight into a corner every time. And so the idea, and that's one of the ideas, with meditation and with using tools like the runes, like tarot, whatever, there's the ego has to kind of be put into the corner, because it's not, we identify with ourselves as our intellect, and it's not our intellect, it's not us that's creating the story. We're cooperating with the muses, we're cooperating with our unconscious, with the subconscious, to bring and to harvest this story, but we're not creating it any more than we create a grapevine, any more than we create a field of wheat. We're working with natural forces. Yeah, exactly. We have a role in it for sure. There's a cooperation, but it's not all out of us.
Yeah, because
So
there's always a team. It's not that solo. Writing is always, like Nancy, you say this about being a painter, that it's only you and the paintbrush and the canvas. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But it's when you do look at this, what Marc is saying and what he's saying, even like the runes for writers, right? You could take runes for painters too, because it is co-creation with a.
This is why artists drink wine, because
I knew you were gonna bring this up.
No, but it's true, because if you're painting somebody's portrait, that is totally different than painting a picture. If your task is to totally recreate what this person looks like, that is just a portrait. But if you're going to really paint something, then you have to relax enough to, I always kind of feel like it's in your DNA, it's like to shut your mind off enough to just go wild with the canvas and the paints and see what happens. But then if you're going to try and sell it, then the marketability becomes a fact. Yes. So now you're going to like, okay, well, that's really fun, and I had fun doing that, but now who's going to buy it? So now you got to make it marketable. Does that make any sense?
That's all we keep saying to you, Marcus. Does this make any sense?
Because
I get where you're going with that.
Yeah, because when you start painting, it's really fun to paint, and you're like, la, 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 and wow, splash that over there, and ooh, that was fun. It's kind of physical in a way, And then when you look at it like, oh, well, who's going to buy that? And then, but some people are really successful at weird and wild paintings, and they get away with it, and that's really cool for them. But then when it comes to, if you're trying as an artist to make a living, which I tried for many years to do, and I did pretty well, but I was doing like dog portraits, because I could talk to the dog, and the dog and I'd get along. I'm like, oh, here you go. And it was fun for me. Other paintings, like doing people's portraits, I was like, oh, no way. Don't want to. I tried, can't do it, don't like it.
You will get the big nose.
You will get exactly what you look like, not what you want to look like. Dogs and cats, it's like, hey, she's cool, she likes us.
Right. Well, and part of that is just being authentic, right? There are writers who, I think I want to write something, but I don't know what. Well, romance is hot. romance writers make a lot of money, so I'll do that, or
Yeah.
sci-fi or fantasy or whatever. And they're writing to market rather than following their passion and following their inner guides. And you know, it's and I've definitely fallen into this trap myself in my writing. Is, you know, I love the storytelling process, but now I've got to go sell the book. Now I've got to get an agent. Now I've got to find an editor, all this stuff. And and it sucks the joy out of it, you know. And it's where I'm coming to now is finally to the point of, I just want to tell my stories. You know, the stories have come to me. The muse has tapped me on the shoulder, whispered in my ear, and now I need to work with her to get this story into the world, onto paper, onto the screen. And that's my job. My job is not to sell the stories. It's just to tell them, and whatever other forces want to get these stories out into the broader world will work with me and will give me the inspiration to make that happen when the time's right.
I think that's when you're doing your passion, right? Things will come along, and you kind of have to have that trust, that inner trust. And that's, you know, when you're on the right path, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, you're going to have obstacles on that path no matter what. But from there, if you're on the right path, then it's easier.
It's easier to stick it out, for sure. But I just feel like there's when you there's people, like, you're walking down the street and somehow you look at a person and you're like, oh man, I've seen that person, I know that person. You know, there's and you really don't, but there's something that connects you. I think it's kind of like somewhere in your past life, maybe you met, or there's something similar between, there's a connection, and it makes it easier to talk to a stranger. Like if you're at a cocktail party, it makes it easier to talk. There's certain people you're like, you can be you can, if they approach you or you approach them, it's easier. And other people, you just go like, don't want you.
Yeah, been there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think there's something in your DNA, or in, I don't know if I should say past lives, because I don't know who believes that or who doesn't, but there's just something, you know, that tells you this is safe over here, but this is not over there. You know, just your instinct comes from somewhere.
Yeah, and I do believe in reincarnation as well, and whether that is a past life connection, whether it's, you know, again, some of those levels of consciousness carry with us life to life to life. Some of them are passed down genetically. You know, there is a consciousness in our DNA. Some of those levels of consciousness, if you look at the multiverse theory in quantum physics, you know, some of those taps on the shoulder, sometimes it's guardian angels, sometimes it's that gut instinct. Some of those things are us in another, you know, a parallel lifetime, telling us to avoid something, to pursue something, whatever. So it's really just trusting. It's learning to perceive those notions and to test them and to trust them, or at least to validate them.
How did you go from mechanical engineering to
that's really funny.
Historical fiction, mythology, runes, meditation? Like, is this something, were you into all of this when you were a kid? Like, was that part of you? And then, you know, because I think engineering, like, it's like, people think accountants have the worst boring job. I'm like, dude, there's creativity in numbers and what they're doing, and you want them to be creative.
Sure.
Especially
them, tax time.
Exactly. So I think that I honestly, there's always creativity. It's about how you do it, how you do something, how you perceive and be part of it. And that's what I love about what you've written for writers, you know, runes for writers, and what you are writing and what you're doing, because I think you are reminding everybody to tap into that, no matter whether or not you're a writer or a reader, no matter what it is, you're reminding us of that. I think that's one of your important qualities of what you bring to the earth, is that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so.
It's important, but how did you get to that? That's what's interesting too.
Well, yeah, and you know, I've always been, I guess, a child of two worlds, if you want to put it poetically, or really just
it's the in and the out again. Here we go.
Right. You know, I mean, I was a kid who would just tinker and take things apart and more or less put them back together again, maybe with some spare parts left over. But I was also, my head was in the clouds. And I was raised, rather fundamentalist Christian, but I was always exploring, always asking questions, always curious. And as I got older, the practical side, you got to get a job, you got to make a living, and engineering is a good way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But at its core, and as I was going through school, engineering fundamentally is a problem solver. You look at, if you look at raw sciences or the natural sciences, they're exploring, they want to understand, they want to, they theorize and they speculate and maybe they hypothesize, but it's the engineers who then take those and put them into practice. And really it's, Larry Brooks has his book out, a couple of books, Story Physics and Story Engineering. And they're excellent guides toward storytelling and the writing craft. And that's really, on the creative side, what it comes down to. Story is a system. Storytelling is a system.
Mm-hmm.
And as an engineer, I look at systems, I tear them apart down to their fundamentals, understand them, put them back together again so they work, and they work better and more efficiently. And so really that's what I'm trying to do in the storytelling process, is to understand the mechanics of it, understand the flow and the natural forces behind it, and bring all these together into a way. I've got at least 24 stories still kicking around inside my skull.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I'm recently turned 50, so that's a lot of output that I need to get done in the next several years if I want to get them done in this lifetime. So my very first novel that came out in 2017 took me 8 years to write, get it into a completed form, and another 10 years to publish. I don't have the kind of time to do that with 24 more stories. So it's really, how do I connect more deeply to story? How do I get the story from, my unconscious onto paper more quickly, more efficiently, and more effectively, with depth and connection and themes and things that matter to get these stories out into the world. So really the engineering background, I think, is actually helping with that, or at least meshing with that, to really develop, I don't want to say systematize it, because that feels like we're sucking the soul out of it, but to, develop that system and that basis of cooperation with the muse and with technology to bring this all together in a more effective manner.
I mean, the first one's always the hardest, right? You have to go through all the bumps, and it's your school fees. That's your school time.
Building blocks.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So you've got Of Ashes of Dust, and then Song of Songs. You want to give everybody an overview of the first two novels, and then we can talk about Son of the Sea, Daughter of the Sun. I mean,
really cool.
I feel like we got to have Donovan music with this. We're going to go to Atlantis now. Yeah.
Right. And they're, with my historicals to date, they've all been separate, so they're not necessarily have to read one to understand the others. Of Ashes and Dust was my first one. This is a Civil War era novel, and mid 19th century, building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's really my shorthand for it is a past life memoir, and the idea for this actually came out of a past life regression that I did with was conducted with me by a friend. So it's really just kind of a story in the life of this young man growing up in the South, fighting for the Confederacy, experiencing love and loss, and all the neat things that life throws at us from time to time. Song of Songs was a.
Can I wait? I want to go back.
Yeah.
Ashes and Dust. So that won the Paul Gillette Memorial Writing Contest and
Yes.
also the National Writers Association Manuscript Contest. So 8 years, but you got like here, you're like, hey, I'm getting my awards now. You know, I'm going in.
Right.
So like,
yeah, you know, and
nice.
that was, yeah, and awards are nice, but particularly for a first novel,
yeah,
you know, it's kind of like a painting or a sculpture. It's like you never know when you're done. But once, and actually the manuscript, I thought was done about year 5, and had this 200,000 word monstrosity that was jumping back and forth in time. It was just a mess because I had no idea what I was doing. But then once I rewrote it, restructured it, cut it in half, and it began getting awards, I finally had an idea of what story looks like in a modern commercial reading audience.
Very cool. So off you go, and then here comes the next one. And so tell us, Song of Songs. I mean, I right there. Of course, I'm a singer. I want to know.
Right. Yeah. So Song of Songs is a retelling of the biblical Queen of Sheba story.
You see, Nancy, I told you, Queen of Sheba's in there.
I know. That's so cool.
And so the title is taken from the biblical book, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. And I think most people know the Queen of Sheba story. And I had known it, obviously, growing up in Sunday school and all of that. It had been part of my common knowledge. And in my teen years, Song of Solomon had a very special place in my heart. And as I got older, and I joined Freemasonry in my mid-20s, and discovered there, you know, the foundational myth of Masonry is the building of Solomon's temple. And I ran across a legend that spoke of, you know, everyone knows of, or we think we know of, the Queen of Sheba's love affair with King Solomon. That the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, was their love story. Well, in this Masonic legend, there's actually a love triangle. The Queen of Sheba comes to Jerusalem. She's heard about the temple. She wants to go meet the builder, see the temple, and Solomon resists, finally gives in. You know, she says, if you let me go see your temple and meet the builder, I will give in to you. And she goes, and she sees the builder, sees him leading his men, you know, working in this great temple, this great engineering feat that he's created, and she falls in love with him. And so there's this love triangle, and Solomon, in his jealousy, attacks the builder, and mayhem ensues. But that really became the genesis of the story. It diverges from that legend quite a bit. It diverges from the biblical tale a lot. But it's you know, to date, that may be of the ones that have been published, this is maybe the dearest to my heart, just because of that.
Well, I think it sounds like it
structure.
kind of goes with your life, going from being an engineer, so you're a builder, right?
Yeah.
And, engineers are builders, and now you're going, hey, I've got my first novel out. It's kind of like that. You're at that transformation point of your writing where you're going, this is what I'm doing. And now you're coaching people, you're a story coach, you're helping writers. I mean, there's so much more you're doing with what you're doing, you know? And so I think that's kind of the interesting thing about that story, is it kind of goes with you.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Come sit on my couch anytime.
Right.
Just kidding, but no, but I mean, it is kind of interesting, you know. Here's this building and this, you know, engineering feat, and I'm going, well, you're a mechanical engineer, you're putting things together, but now you're going, I'm going to change the putting things together into a different format.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, I've really come to the conclusion, particularly in the last few years. I've studied many different forms of mysticism, you know, from Western Christian mysticism through Freemasonry, into now I'm really digging into the mythos behind the Norse cosmology. You know, there are a lot of similarities, a lot of connections, and the power to it all is myth, and I've, especially, when the Me Too movement began to come out, and women finally began to feel empowered to speak out about, this unacceptable behavior by males. I won't call them men, because true men don't do that.
Thank you.
Oh, nice one.
I know. I
It
like
really
that.
made
Thank
me
you.
it made me take a close look at, what's wrong with us. I'm not sure the language policy on your show, but I'm trying to keep it tame. But
You can do
that's
whatever you want. It's freedom of
okay.
speech, and we need to take it while we can.
What the fuck is
It's in
wrong
danger.
with these
Yeah.
people? That why can boys not become men?
Right.
And it dawned on me that in our ancient cultures we had initiation.
Right.
And these were real initiations. The Freemasonry and other college fraternities, all these things have what they call initiations, but true initiation is transformative. It is a death and rebirth. The boy dies and is reborn a man. And when we lost our myths, the power of the mythic structure also came when societies were more matriarchal as well. And there was a balance and a cooperation between, I'll say, the energies. Gender doesn't quite do it justice. There's masculine and feminine energy. And, women have a natural, a biological initiation. They become women, and there's no getting around it. Men boys, I should say, are just kind of coddled into adulthood. And there's no forced separation. There's nothing that causes the boy to die and to be reborn. We don't have the trials anymore. We don't have the tasks and the dreams and all these things that go into a true initiation, a true
Well,
death.
that's really interesting, because in Africa, we, when we lived in Kenya, and so Nancy used to work with Joy Adams and Elsa the Lion, Born Free, and she used to really go and track animals and all of that to, for science. This was also science versus emotion, or connect. You know what I mean? It's like it was science, and yet there's this other thing working that science didn't want to look at. So it's like that balance that we're going through now. So Nancy does this. I'm growing up with kids in a tribal setting in the bush, and the kids, and it was in South Africa, same thing, and it's in even the Native American culture here, same thing, boyhood and womanhood. And you did it at a very young age. If you're going to turn 13 was a big deal. We have in the Mexican culture the quinceañeras and things, but here, the men would go. They would take the young boy out to hunt, and not necessarily what we want. We don't want to see the lions go down anymore, because we don't have any. But that's because we have the big, white trophy hunt. You want to talk about anyway?
Okay.
Now I got to watch my mouth. Don't start.
Okay.
It's the same people, right? And so anyway, they would go out, and the boy had to bring it home, and he had to go out there, and half of the time you're running barefoot, like Shaka Zulu. What he did, I always talk about Shaka Zulu, because he was smart, and he outsmarted the British. It wasn't too hard to do. It was called create a corral. It wasn't hard, because everybody, again, no, I'm not meaning that culturally wrong. I'm meaning they were used to, we're going to walk and fight the same way. He turned around, isn't easy. It's easy. They're doing the same pattern over and over. I'm changing the pattern. I'm going to circle them and do it this way.
But
and that was, but the kids, they were kids. They were so young, and they were running barefoot over hot coals, over thorns. They were doing all of that so that they would be prepared for battle. And you see those kids going into this change of, I'm going to be a man to do this. And you see it in ancient American times. So what you were talking about, Civil War, look at the young that did that, the youth. So I think we somehow did lose that. And women had their own things too. You had to be this to be, able to be sold, so you could get your the cattle into the family. If you're going to be married,
there was a task, or two or three, or a process that you had to overcome to prove you're a woman or to prove you're a man. whichever one it was.
It's not
There was
drinking
something
somebody under the
that
table in college.
Yeah, it wasn't like, here's your birthday cake with so many candles, whoopee. There was true meaning, and it hit you square in the face. Because when I watched some of their ceremonies, I was like, well, part of me was like,
dude,
yikes. And the other part was, wow, man, that child got it. The seriousness of what was about to happen. And I'm not saying that we should have the same customs now, but there is something we've lost by everything being too easy.
Yes.
I mean, the birthday cake, somebody else makes it for you, and you put the candles on it and you light it, and we all have fun and have cake and whoopee. But the big part of growing up and the accomplishments that you're expected to do isn't there.
And that's when people spiral out and they control by raping and doing all these things, hunting, big trophy hunting. You know what I mean? There's hunting for food. There's just different things.
Well, how do you prove who you are?
Right. And
like,
so this is, I'm going to be a man by being Harvey Weinstein,
Right.
Now he's in his little walker. I'm like, yeah, sorry. But like, I like seeing you.
Nice.
No, I'm sorry. He's a horrible human being.
But there is something to like the tribal aspect of, and with, it's like, oh, we're going to religion you or intellectualize you, educate you, and that's good to sometimes and sometimes not. But there's a part that gets lost of the seriousness of going from this age to that age and what's expected and why, and can you handle it, can you not, and how do you prove to yourself more than anything else, not to everybody else in the tribe, prove to yourself, and the pride that comes with proving to yourself that, yes, I've crossed this next barrier or this next step. And that's what we don't have.
Right.
We just get presents.
Right. Yeah. And part of that is, whether it's the state, whether it's, church, religion, what have you, these places, these institutions have taken the place of what manhood once did. And so there's really fundamentally, there's no reason for a boy to become a man because the state is the father, or the church is the father. Our culture doesn't, we've displaced manhood. And so it becomes, for me, it was a conscious act to seek out, because I didn't get it growing up. I didn't get it in my youth of how to become a man. It was a conscious act of looking within myself, looking to ancient myths, looking to, the fundamental forces of nature of what makes a man, and I want to become that. And
it's not abusing. It is. That's the complete opposite. But that's that fake control thing out of desperation.
It is,
and it's no foundation to it.
No, it's boys having tantrums is all it is. It's
you don't
boys
see
playing
animals.
a soldier.
We're going right back to the beginning of the conversation. Nature, the birds have to fall out of their nest a gazillion times to learn how to fly.
Yes.
Some don't make it and some do. But like how, their whole testing, you watch baby birds, and it's like this back and forth thing. The mom, the dad's back and forth. They're watching, they're trying to tell, but they have to let the kid go. And now, I always talk about this on a show. I have a friend who wouldn't let her child play in the dirt because it's dirty, but it can crawl on the carpet. Like, what? What are you thinking, man? The kid needs to you need to get in the dirt. Otherwise you're going to get sick, so it's kind of this, it's a very interesting thing that we have become. And I think going back, like you're saying, going back into these ancient myths, you think about these lords, these legends, these, we're going in, like when you think about Vikings, and we've got Viking blood in us, so we dig this. Nancy and I are Vikings, or we've got that in our ancestry, and it's like they were badass, man. Don't mess with us. As you can tell, we're like getting our little hot thermometer of anger of things. It's already starting to rise. But no, there is something. But you think about the gods of the sea, like they used to call the ship was always female, and then that the helm was always like the dragon, or like here we are. There was this visual, and I think that's what's so cool about historical fiction and what you're doing is it creates this visual feeling, and there's this mythical visual thing. And when you read stories and books like yours, you start to connect and see that. And all you have to do to remember is that visual. when you go into a situation is those visuals of those gods and deities and all of that, you know, those characters that we're talking about. And I think that's the power of that too. Those
and that was the power of myth, right? You know, myths taught people, you know, they weren't, you know, religion is very cut and dry. You know, the stories are supposed to be believed as fact, and there's not room for creativity in them. But the myths helped people to understand their place in the world, how nature works, how society works, how I interact with you in a healthy and beneficial way. And they were recognized as allegories. They were recognized as, you know, jumping off points. They weren't the be all and end all, but if you knew the myths, you could make that connection. You know, the myth talks about, let's take from the Greek, you know, flying too close to the sun. Well, what does that mean? You know, I'm not literally going to fly too close to the sun, but what can I take from that? And we understood the world in a different way when we had a strong connection to myth. You know,
makes you think.
Thor. Yeah,
we're actually using our brains, right? Is that what you're
exactly right?
We're actually using our brains. Like seriously, you know, don't just like something on Facebook.
Can I tell a quick story? I know I've said this before, but when in Kenya, we went to one of these, it was a family meeting where they were trying to figure out who stole some jewelry from the household, and they thought their house girl, which is what they call them over there. Don't get mad at me. I'm not racist, but this is in Africa, and the house girl was being accused of stealing the madam, the housewife,
the white madam, yes,
yeah, the white madam jewelry. So the house girl was like, "No, I did not," and so she was adamant. So they called in what they called the Sheik, the Sheik, right? Yeah. And he comes in, and I was like, they said, "Do you want to come watch?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." I want to see what happens here. And I'm like, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen, but it wasn't. So we all sat around the table. So you're in like this dining room of white people, and here comes the Sheik, and he was kind of Indian, African Indian mix, and with the turban and the big jewel on the forehead thingy. And I was like, wow, this is fun. And so we all sit around the table, and I found myself getting kind of nervous about it because I was like, wow, this is so weird, but it's cool. So they're all sitting, and the house girl had to stand. And so we sit around the table, and he starts saying things that I couldn't understand because it's in a different language. But anyway, then he's got this bowl of water, and he takes out this powder that's purple, and he sprinkles it in the water, and he's peering into it. And then he's like, okay, time for the bread. So they pass out this really stale bread, chunks of bread for each of us to eat. And the deal thing was, if you ate the bread and you started to choke, you were the thief. And as I learned that this was what was going to happen, my throat got so tight. I'm like, I can't swallow this bread. I'm going to be in trouble here. But the house girl just ran out of the house. She felt so guilty and so sure that he was going to see her face in the bowl of water and purple powder. And it was amazing to me, the power of suggestion, how strong that works. And it's a cool story. But see, this is what I think happens when stories are handed down. This drama that we don't have anymore. That you have it on TV, but this totally really thing where you physically feel what's happening, even though nobody's touched you. It's in your mind, and I think that is I don't know how else to describe it, but that experience will stick with me forever. Never stealing anybody's jewelry, never.
You will choke. You will choke.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It was amazing how all of us had trouble swallowing the bread. All of us. It was weird. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's a myth. You know what I mean? It's like how the stories are so strong. Yeah.
Powerful.
They're so strong because there's a physical reaction to a story.
Yes.
Is that what you think of when you're typing, like in writing something that you want them to have people to believe that powerfully?
Yeah, I mean, I really try to create immersive stories, not
Mm-hmm.
just showing, not just a visual story, but what are the smells, what are the
Feeling.
sounds, what are the
Mm-hmm.
the subtle, not even the tactile impulses, but just the subtlety, the hair raising on the back of the neck kind of stuff, that
Mm-hmm.
to really put people into it,
And
and
it
that's
stays with you forever. Like,
yeah,
when you put a really good book down, it's sitting with you on your shoulder for like days,
right.
and you like that. That's a good monkey mind when that happens to you. But do tell us about Son of the Sea, Daughter of the Sun.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is I really love this story as well. It is a set in the 7th century, so it's essentially the beginning of a 7th century accidental round the world voyage. So we have a prince of Visigothic Spain. So essentially following the fall of the Roman Empire, the Visigoths, who are related to the Vikings, related to the Norse. Considered among the barbarian tribes, which I'm not a fan of that term. But after they sacked Rome in 410, they eventually migrated into Spain, developed a culture there. And at the same time, the Mayan culture was flourishing in the Americas. And so it's, just it really started when I discovered what's called the Piri Reis map, which was a map discovered in Istanbul in, I believe, 1929, somewhere around that range. And it shows the New World, shows the west coast of Africa and Europe and parts of the Americas. And on closer examination, you can see parts of the west coast of, or south and west coast of Panama, and parts of Antarctica, which had not been discovered or not well mapped at this time in history. And parts of the map arguably are more accurate than anything that came along for another 300 years in terms of longitude, which is the east-west direction, which is very difficult to map and to chart without a good timepiece, which really didn't come along until the 1700s. So I really began to question, well, how could this map come to be? How could it show these areas of the world that hadn't been explored by Europeans to that point, or at least not publicly acknowledged? And what might this story be? So this story really grew out of that, discovering that map and speculating on how it might have come to be and to show what it shows.
Very cool. Oh my gosh. And yeah, how the maps are created. I've always thought about that stuff. Like, how did people even do cartography way back when, and especially when they're going on the moon and the stars, and how they were doing it? Like, how? Who
Yeah.
started that? That's cool. Everybody, Marc Graham's books are out now. Son of the Sea, Daughter of the Sun, and also Runes for Writers, Boost Your Creativity and Destroy Writer's Block. Take it out. Take it out. Go to his website, marc-graham.com. As I was saying earlier, it's Marc with a C. Of course, we want to thank you, Marc, for joining us. It's been quite a conversation. Is there something we haven't touched on yet?
I think we've hit it all.
I know.
With the book, you mentioned the cards and dice are also available. You can just go to runesforwriters.com to get to those as well.
Okay, runesforwriters.com. He's also on Facebook, all those great places. And we want to thank everyone for joining us. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. We have new episodes airing every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, in all kinds of outlets, from Apple Podcasts to iTunes to Spreaker to Stitcher to Blog Talk to YouTube, Spotify, iHeart Yourself, all that good stuff. So check it out at bigblendradio.com. Thank you for listening as always. We always love to play music that goes with our guests, but this song is fun. It's called Write a Freaking Book. And that's what happens when you have writer's block. But this is a little bit of a, like a little lover's spat. And it's like, you have that much to say about me, write a book. So this is from one of our favorite group of songwriters. I mean, really, when you talk about writing, the most amazing group called the Tall Men, and go to tallmengroup.weebly.com. You can get their albums on CD Baby as well. But here it is, Write a Frickin' Book. And you're going to need to go get Runes for Writers first. So check that out first.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Marc.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Baby, there's no doubt if you try to hold 'em in, they just keep falling out. Your loquacious talent is hard to overlook. Why don't you stop that yapping at me and write a freaking book? Page after page, I know you could expound on all I'm doing wrong, but it wouldn't make a sound, and the fury would be silent where once these four walls shook. If you'd stop your yapping at me and write a freaking book. I take 100 years of solitude over all these grapes of wrath. You're the portrait of a lady until you cross my path. You need a heart of darkness to kill a mockingbird, and as I lay dying, I still hear every word. A river of syllables drips from your lips. Turn that water into wine. Hit the Times bestseller list. A Pulitzer Prize could stream from your babbling brook. If you'd stop that yapping at me and write a freaking book. Why don't you stop that yapping at me and write a freaking book?